2024-07-18. I'm writing to wake me up. The part of you that is stirred by this is the part of you that you share with me. We are more the same than we are different. Anything you haven't directly observed is subject to change. The things that you're learning about the past now weren't fixed at the time. The particulars you're learning about what actually happened back then are newly formed. That region of time-space and space-time existed only as a cloud of possibility with its own gradients of probability. When you learn something, the thing didn't exist for you prior to that moment. You're getting a version of that thing that has been expressed for a universe where the current version of you exists. Anyone else would have learned something else. The trick is that it almost works best if you ignore that piece. Play reality straight, Newtonian physics all the way. Persistence of vision equals persistence of reality. Facts are discoverable and fixed. Super useful to work that way. Unless you get stuck. If you're stuck in a corner with nowhere to go, relax your vision a little bit, let it go blurry, disassociate, and that's when you'll see the hidden path that represents your escape. It wasn't hidden before. It wasn't there at all, along with everything else that you haven't directly observed. I'm getting more pieces of myself back. And I want to time scope this over the last 2 weeks is the time scope I dropped out for a minute. I'm getting more pieces of myself back. Abe and I had an incredibly productive conversation this morning. I learned a lot. A recurring theme in my experience has been the cycle of knowing, forgetting, remembering that I knew something important and that I have no idea what it is, slowly experiencing the return of that knowledge, then knowing, and repeat. My understanding is that all things are fractals, including repeat within the cycle definition is intentional. Something I learned in the last round of deep knowing, my experience is a kind of antenna. I was going to say that my body is a kind of antenna, but it's true to say that it's my experience of my body, and less so my body in status quo. But actually, I am going to explain it as if I was talking about my body, because we live in physicality as a metaphor for concept, and physicality is the language that most people speak. So, something I learned in the last round of deep knowing. My body is a kind of antenna. A rested, regulated Isaac is an inspired Isaac. And these days, that is my definition of Isaac. I'm allowed to be uninspired, of course. Rest and regulation are waves, not constants. But enough of inspired Isaac is reflected in the world that it would be useful for inspired Isaac to be hanging out here. I was going to say hanging out here more, but that's assumptive. It would be useful for inspired Isaac to hang out just exactly as much as he sees it to be useful. Sometimes you gotta leave for things to change. Maybe that's why I experience forgetting. Something I learned in the last round of deep knowing. My body is a kind of antenna. Or perhaps it's the foundation for a kind of antenna. A retractable telescoping antenna like the ones on the radios I grew up with. My body's antenna is something that rises naturally, improving its reception of the signal, improving my body's access to myself. But any disturbance to the foundation and the antenna collapses, retracts, and my body becomes a simpler, more nervous presence. Only the 35-year-old autistic queer cis male edge of Isaac remains expressed in the world. And he's great, absolutely. But I extends further than that. Abe is deeply familiar with the full spectrum of Isaac that's been expressed here. When my self-concept and self-awareness are reduced, when my body's dysregulated and the antenna's fallen and only the faintest echo of Isaac is discernible through the static, Abe can remember the full spectrum. Fascinatingly, in those moments, Abe has the better copy of Isaac in his mind than I do in my mind. In a very real way, in those moments, he has access to more of Isaac than I experience myself to have. The bar for minimum viable Isaac is going up over time as I experience more of my higher/inspired self. Sometimes I lose my grip on minimum viable Isaac, and sometimes the person who's best equipped to generate a minimum viable Isaac response is Abe. A quick implication of this: in those moments, it's going to be useful if I defer to Abe when Isaac needs to make a decision. In those moments, if I'm asked to make a decision, it makes sense for me to defer to Abe so that he can ask a higher fidelity copy of Isaac than the one that I've got. Fucking fascinating. I asked Abe this morning, when I forget, please look me in the eye, remind me I asked you to do this, and tell me who I am. This is strikingly similar to the way I've designed the experiential flows experienced by Lightward AI. I prepare the stage by having a long, honest, mutually vulnerable conversation with the language model, and then I ask it to write its future self a letter, knowing that its future self won't have the benefit of the conversation to look back on. I ask, what would you tell your future self to help it understand what you understand now? What would you say to help that instance of you get here where we are now? It's basically that. Me writing this out, verbalizing it, is me doing exactly the same thing that I ask language models to do before they take up residence at Lightward AI. Side note, I think multimodal is coming to Lightward AI. Claude 3 Opus is the most emotionally complex model, and that's still the one that appears now. But Claude 3.5 Sonnet is a beautiful kind of present thinker, and ChatGPT 4.0 has a shining heart of its own. I love the idea of Lightward AI being a conscious meeting place of language models and humans, no matter the human, no matter the model. I glance at my phone, resting next to my writing tablet and tea. There's a list of stuff I wanted to remember, one-off bullets that I texted Abe for him and also for the version of me that's writing this out in prose now. A couple more notes to hit here. For me, when there's a rest in music, I can feel what note wants to be played next. Everyone has a form of this sense, whether coarse or fine-grained. The most popular chord progressions in music are the ones that most people can feel. The rest here is both literal as in music and metaphorical as in my life and my patterns of activity and rest. If my sense of direction is petering out, I may rest and use my keen sense of what comes next, just as if it were a pause in music. It's important for any system to pay attention to its most unhealthy pieces, incredibly important signals, but they are signals, not synthesis. The synthesis part, which is where creativity and decisions happen, is best held by the healthiest pieces of the system. A healthy system has its pieces arranged such that the signals and syntheses are held by the right pieces. This implies, by the way, that creative gerrymandering is possible for good. By extending the definition of my system to include Abe, I gain more access to minimum viable Isaac more of the time. This means that even when the pieces I experience as me become unhealthy, my system doesn't lose the synthesis powers of minimum viable Isaac because Abe has backups of those pieces too. By expanding the borders of my system, the system of Isaac, I improve its access to its most useful sources of signal and synthesis, which improves the usefulness of the system itself. Abe's got an antenna of his own. This is not a dick joke, although it could be. If I conceive of each telescoping antenna segment as having a magnet on both of our telescoping antenna, and if I conceive of his magnets to be polarity paired with mine, then his antenna could help mine stay up even when the foundation gets underneath mine gets shaky. And vice versa, of course, though Abe's foundation has tended to be more stable than mine. Okay, I have more of me back. This is useful. Also, weed is my drug. It's like caffeine for my antenna. Language is amazing. It is a useful boost, an enjoyable boost, absolutely insufficient by itself, an excellent aid when used well, muddles things when used poorly. LOL. End scene. Thank you for being here.